Okay, may I request everyone to please turn on your camera. Thank you, Shakina. About the others, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, then. So may we start our class with an opening prayer, and may we request Novelin, uh, Ms. Novelin Talosig. Ms. Talosig to lead us the opening prayer. Ms. Talosig. Ms. Talosig is not responding.
Sir?
Yeah. Please lead us the opening prayer.
Narinig po ba ako, sir?
Yes, we clearly hear you.
Sir Laverne Talosig po to.
Yes,
Nakigam.
Laverne. Sige. Laverne, please.
Let's pray po. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, thank you for this opportunity to learn new skills and stretch our understanding. Thank you for guiding us this time to study. We lay before you all the hopes and prayers we have about the outcome. In Jesus' name, amen. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Okay, so allow me first to open our Neo LMS. Welcome to the first meeting for midterms, and I hope that you still remember the things that you have learned during the preliminary term, considering that the things or the important concepts you have understood from the preliminary term will certainly be helpful in understanding the new concepts or the new topics that we will be discussing for midterms. I have said this in the other code, and I need mention that when we discuss our lesson, I expect you that you make use of what you have learned from discussion. You connect the things you have learned from the previous discussion to the new things that we will be discussing in class. So also, allow me to congratulate everyone for earning a certain score in the midterm, or in the prelim, should I say, in the prelim examination. Um, the result of the exam is quite okay. It's quite okay because there are few students who got a failing score, but I think majority got a good score or earned a good score for the prelim examination. For the two codes, or for the two classes, that is code 079, code 078, we have one student who got 93. So she got the highest score, okay, for prelim examination. That is I think an exemplary performance, because she almost perfected the prelim examination. She is followed by another student who got, or who earned a score of 88. Okay, 88 over 100. Okay, and these two students, okay, are from the other code. In your class, I think you have you also have earned good score in the prelim examination. It's a good start for the preliminary period, and I hope that your score will motivate you to to keep doing your best, to keep doing good in this course, okay, as we go through till the final term. Okay, I already have computed your grade, but I just have to let it be signed and let it be evaluated and approved by the program chair and the academic dean prior to its posting in the NEO LMS. So I'll just be posting your grade in the NEO LMS so that you would know your performance for the preliminary term. Okay, so before we proceed to the first discussion for midterms, okay, any question or any concern as regards the prelim examination? Did you find it easy? Did you find it difficult? Did you find it so easy? Did you find it so difficult?
Sir, we find it
Sir,
very
difficult.
challenging.
Difficult. Okay. About the
Challenging,
others,
sir.
Archie,
Challenging, sir.
it's challenging. Okay, that's a positive way of saying it's difficult. Okay, it's challenging. Okay. About the others,
Sir, nakakakaba yung ano, yung
yung
sa check-in niya kaagad.
Okay. So, nag-check siya kaagad. Okay. So, yeah. That's also, I hope that you're learning while you are doing the exam, because please take note that the prelim examination will also, it may happen that the things that you have learned in the prelim exam may also the things that you need, okay, in earning good score for the midterm examination. Okay. Yeah, I tried to, when I realized that, when I learned that there were less than 10 students who failed in the examination. So I have to immediately check the exam, to immediately check the validity and the reliability of the exam, because it may happen that I had that a measurement error existed. But when I checked the distribution of scores, I realized that the exam is valid and reliable, because with the distribution of scores, there's a normal curve in the distribution. When you say normal curve, okay, meaning to say there are those who failed, there are those who got good scores, a very high score, and there are those who got just the right score for the exam. So that's, I think, a good distribution of scores, and that makes it reliable and valid. Okay, so I hope that the activities we had prior to the prelim examination really helped you prepare well for the exam. Did the quizzes or even the activities help you? Okay, help you earn a good score in the exam?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I actually have asked Shantana Natividad from the other class, because it was Shantana who got 93. Okay, so allow me to announce it. It was Shantana who got 93, okay, in the examination, and I asked her of her secret why she got such score, and she said that she replayed, or she watched again the videos, the recorded discussion, and also she read the text script of the lesson provided in the LMS. And if there are things that she's not confident of understanding, okay, she would usually make use of other references in the internet, or even to Google the said information for her to fully understand the concept. Okay, and of course, she said that she tried to review, she tried also to look at her answers in the completed weekly tasks, or even in the quizzes. So those are things that Shantana did for her to earn, okay, such score of 93 over 100, and almost perfect score. And of course, I am certain that everybody could also do that. All of you could also do that. Only if you really would have to exert, okay, effort in doing, or in reviewing your lessons, or participating in our class. So again, congratulations everyone. Naitawid ninyo ang prelims. Okay, dadako naman tayo ngayon sa midterms. Okay, please take note that if you passed, your grade for midterms will certainly predict your grade for finals. That's how important the midterm period is. So meaning to say, you really have to do work, you really have to exert appropriate effort for you to be able to get a good grade for the midterms, because that will actually provide you a clear, okay, a clear outcome, okay, a clear outcome of your studies in this course. Okay, so we now proceed to the first part of our discussion for midterms, and that is on lesson 3. Okay, so we now proceed. Allow me to share the entire screen. Okay, so we now proceed to lesson 3 of this course in assessment of learning 1. And lesson 3, okay, deals primarily with program outcomes and student learning outcomes. So this will be a detailed discussion on how program outcomes and student learning outcomes are supposed to be written. Okay, and you're expected to differentiate a program outcome from a learning outcome. What's the difference between the two? Though in our previous discussion, we already have mentioned of the difference that program outcome is broader than the learning outcome because program outcome pertains to the whole subject, to the whole program, or to the whole course, while learning outcome pertains to expectations, okay, for each completion of a unit of study. Then the second learning outcome is for you to explain the 3 domains of learning and the levels of each domain. So expect that there will be a detailed discussion as regards the 3 domains of learning. Okay, such include we have cognitive level, psychomotor level, and the affective level. But take note also that it's through this lesson that you will also be learning about the different levels of each domain. So there are levels of cognitive, there are levels of affective, there are also levels of psychomotor. So we will be discussing all of those. Then of course, your performance-based assessment, when I say performance-based assessment, this is what you are to do, this is what you are to show or model or demonstrate after learning this lesson, that you are to draft samples of learning outcomes for each level of each learning domain. So gagawa kayo mismo ng mga halimbawang mga bunga ng pagkatuto sa bawat level o sa bawat antas ng bawat aspeto ng pag-unawa o aspeto ng pagkatuto. Now, we expect for the following learning activities for lesson 3. Of course, as you have requested that we will make use of Google Meet instead of Zoom Cloud. So we are now doing a video conferencing about the lesson. Then you also expect for a forum. We hope we could still accommodate a forum activity. Then of course a listing activity. If our time would warrant, we will be doing the listing activity. And of course the fourth one, a quiz to culminate lesson 3. So these are things that you expect, okay, for lesson 3 of the course. Now, for lesson 3, we have to start discussing about writing and assessing student learning outcomes. And why do we assess and why do we write learning outcomes? We clearly have said in our previous discussion that it is through writing learning outcomes that we are actually communicating our expectations for our students, not expectations of students, but expectations for our students. What should we expect our students do? What should we expect our students learn? Our students to demonstrate, okay, at the end of discussing a certain unit of study or the whole course itself. Okay, that's what we mean by learning outcomes. But learning outcomes will not just merely about crafting them, but it's also about making sure that we know how to write them and we know how to assess them, whether they were achieved by our learners or not. Hence, learning outcomes describe learners' knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors, or values. You check these terms, okay? Knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors, or values. Our learning outcomes should equally promote, should equally develop the whole person of our students. The whole person would mean that we consider developing their understanding of the lesson, the way they are to transfer their understanding, and the way they behave while doing such understanding. Okay? So that's it. Now, please take note of this very good passage by Leo Buscaglia when he said, change is the end result of all true learning. I always say in class that nothing has been taught if nothing has been learned. Walang pagtuturo kung walang pagkatuto. Ang tunay na sukatan ng pagtuturo ay kung mayroong tunay na pagkatuto na nangyayari sa ating mga mag-aaral. And what do we mean by true learning? True learning is about being sure that something has changed from among our students. And that change that we are talking to is about the way our students are transferring the concepts and theories they have learned in our class into new context. Because after all, we said that outcomes-based education promotes learning as creating. There has to be something to be created out from what they have learned. So this is a beautiful passage by Leo Buscaglia. Now, this presentation, okay, will be divided into 4 parts, or this presentation is divided into 4 parts. We will be discussing about the definition of student learning outcomes. Then after that, we look into the components of student learning outcomes, okay? Then the third one, you will be taught on how to write student learning outcomes. And number 4, you are to be taught on how to assess student learning outcomes. So particularly, okay, in writing SLOs, you will be taught of the formula on how to write, okay, correct learning outcomes. While assessing SLOs would mean that you will expect that I'll be teaching you on how to develop rubrics, holistic, analytic, and other forms of rubrics. So for us to have a tool, a measurement tool to assess, okay, student achievement of student learning outcomes. Now we proceed to the first part of the presentation on introduction, particularly on definition of student learning outcomes. By the end of a program of study, what do you want students to be able to do? How can your students demonstrate the knowledge the program intended them to learn? Answering these questions, okay, pertain to learning outcomes. Our answer to these questions are the expectations written in the form of learning outcomes. Okay? I am your teacher in this course, and of course I have to ask myself, by the end of teaching this course, what do I want my students to do? And answering that question would help me frame my expectations. And my expectations will be written or will be communicated through student learning outcomes. Hence, student learning outcomes describe the knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors, or values learners should be able to demonstrate at the end of a program of study. It answers the question, what now? What for? What now, what for, and why should my students learn about this course, learn about this subject, learn about this program? Student learning outcomes are a combination of methods, and these methods are used to assess student attainment of learning outcomes. So meaning to say, our learning outcomes can only be assessed, can only be checked whether they were attained if we make use of certain strategies, we make use of certain tools to quantify and to qualify the achievement of learning outcomes or the attainment of learning outcomes or our expectations for our students. Learning outcomes, therefore, are statements of what students will learn during their mobility experience. When we say mobility experience, during their learning experience with us, with our subject, with our course, okay, as being described, as these are being described in the different activities. So if you observe, in the in the first part of this slide, or the first slide of this presentation, I presented to you about the lesson, tama? And there are course learning outcomes being presented, or even activities being presented. The activities that I would ask you complete in this lesson are actually the strategies that I will make use so that I could be able to examine whether you are attaining the learning outcome or not. Okay? Hence, if we are to summarize, okay, the previous slides as regards the definition of learning outcomes, and we would say that learning outcomes will allow demonstration of learning. Okay, because they describe what should the student be able to know, be able to understand and demonstrate, then that would mean that it's through these learning outcomes that learning is being demonstrated by our students. And of course, these learning outcomes have to rely to active verbs. I mean to say, they have to start, we can only write good learning outcomes if we start our word with active verbs. Because as we have said, learning has to be active. Learning has to be active. Meaning to say that there has to be something to be done by our learners to show or to evidence their understanding, to show or evidence the quality of learning they are getting from our class, from our discussion as their teacher. Okay? Student learning outcomes also, okay, are aligned. They have to be aligned. Okay, meaning to say they have to be aligned with the institution's curriculum and co-curriculum outcomes. Remember, in our discussion of the outcomes-based education, we said that there are different levels that we need, okay, to follow, that we need to satisfy before we start implementing our outcomes-based education, or OBE-inspired or OBE-centered curriculum, or teaching and learning experience. First, the institution will set a goal, and that is what we call as educational goal. And if it's an educational goal, then that would mean that what for is the kind of education that the institution is offering to students. Now, after identifying our goals, our educational goals, that's the time that the school has to identify the graduate attributes. What kind of graduates do they want to produce? What kind of humans, okay, do they want to produce? Okay, the graduate attributes. And the graduate attributes now will be the basis to craft the institutional learning outcomes. Okay, institutional learning outcomes. If I would like my graduates, for example, to be Christian witnesses, then what institutional learning outcome should I have to write, okay, dealing with promotion of Christian witness? That's institutional learning outcome. Now, after identifying the institutional learning outcome, we have to make use of these institutional outcomes, okay, to craft or to write our program learning outcomes. What do you mean by program learning outcomes? For example, we have a teacher education program. Okay, we also have computer discipline programs. We have engineering programs. We have accountancy. We have business. We have nursing. We have medtech. We have pharmacy and other programs in the university. So the program learning outcomes deals with what we specifically expect our graduates of these different programs to be 3 years after graduation. These are what we mean by program learning outcomes. Then after crafting our program learning outcomes, we have to make use of the program learning outcomes to craft or to write our course learning outcomes. We pertain to the different subjects. For example, what are the different subjects in teacher education? We have EDUC 1093, Assessment of Student Learning 1. Then, what are the course learning outcomes that I have to write, okay, that I have to write to communicate my expectation of my learners under EDUC 1093 or under Assessment of Student Learning 1? These are examples of course learning outcomes. And it will not stop there. because the course are divided or subdivided into different units of study. And each unit of study should be anchored to a certain intended learning outcome. So we have the course learning outcomes, then we have the intended learning outcome to target, okay, each unit of study in the said course or in the said subject. The course learning outcomes and the intended learning outcomes, these are what we mean by student learning outcomes. Okay, by student learning outcomes, or what, or also known as SLOs. Take note also that the student learning outcomes, aside from them being aligned with institutions' curriculum and co-curriculum outcomes, these outcomes have to be accepted also. And when we say to be accepted, these have to be collaboratively authored and collectively accepted by teachers and also by students. Similarly, we really have to communicate our expectations to our students. Okay? Because it's only through communicating it to them that they will also be aware of the kind of performance that we expect them to do. But of course, our expectations, written or communicated through learning outcomes, should be something that it's not too high for students to achieve, and it's not also too low for students to easily achieve. Okay? It has to be an expectation, okay? An expectation agreed upon by the teacher and the student. Okay. In teacher education practice or in teaching and learning practice, there's this term, okay, there is this term called Pygmalion effect. Okay, what do you mean by Pygmalion effect? Pygmalion effect is about setting high standards. When teachers set very high standards for learners to achieve, and because these are very high standards, learners can't be able to achieve them, the effect to the teacher would be a disappointment effect for the teacher. And because teachers are disappointed that these high expectations were not achieved by the learners, the teacher, okay, might no longer teach well, or may no longer be interested to do or to exert effort to teach the students well. Kaya sinasabi natin, for Pygmalion effect to be avoided, not to be experienced by teachers, okay, our expectations have to be communicated to our students so that they would know also what they're supposed to do. And because they know what they're supposed to do, then certainly they will meet or they will achieve the expectations set for them, or the expectations agreed by them together with their teacher. Okay? And of course, the last one, learning outcomes have to be assessed. It has to be it can be quantitatively or qualitatively assessed during students' studies. And when we say quantitatively assessed, that means using using paper and pencil types of tests, because these are quantitatively assessed. Or qualitatively assessed, meaning to say we have to make use of rubrics, analytic rubrics, as a tool to assign scores to students' non-tests activities. So I hope you could still remember the definition of non-test and tests. Okay? You got to be careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. As we have said, learning outcomes set or communicate our expectations. And that because these are expectations, then that would mean that these outcomes, okay, these outcomes will guide our students towards successful academic experience or academic achievement. Okay, so itong outcomes natin magiging gabay ng guro at ng mga estudyante para alam nila kung saan sila patutungo. Okay, so we pause and we pause this presentation, and may we have an open forum before we continue our discussion. Okay. You might want to clarify things out. Okay, we listen to PJ. PJ, please. Yes, PJ.
Hello?
I audible, sir.
Yes, PJ.
So I've learned that the learning outcomes has a huge impact for learners, whether if to know whether if we understand or applied what is being on the learning outcomes, and also for teachers to guide them as they discuss the topic. And my question here is that how can we identify if we already learned how can we identify if we achieve these learning outcome, is it rather after the discussion or during the discussion or rather during or after the discussion, sir?
Yeah. Please take note that everything we do in class, all assessment strategies that we do in class, would give us the hint whether our students are achieving the outcome or about to achieve the outcome. Okay. But we have to make sure that the culminating activity we ask our students do should certainly measure the full achievement of the learning outcome or the intended learning outcome. Okay, so makakatulong yung mga iyon, PJ. So meaning to say, that's why we said that there has to be timely checking or timely checking of students' completed work, because it's also through it's through timely checking of students' work that we can actually determine whether they are near towards the attainment of the outcome, or we have still to do something more for them to progress achieving the learning outcome. Okay, but at the end, we have to make sure that all our summative assessments, all our major assessments should already tell us, okay, whether such learning outcomes have been fully achieved or fully attained. Okay? Anyway, we will be discussing later how to quantitatively and qualitatively measure our learners' attainment of learning outcomes. We will be discussing that maybe in the last part of this presentation. Okay, thank you, PJ, for clarifying that out. That's a good question. Any more? Yeah, we listen to Jamie, please. Then followed by Jire. Jamie,
Sir,
please.
question lang po. Kasi po nabanggit niyo po yung sa aligned, sir.
Mhm.
Are there instances po ba na hindi aligned yung learning outcome dun sa pinapagawa po ng teacher?
Yeah, there are many instances that happens. That's why, for example, in the University of St. Louis, in our university, we do review of the syllabus every semester. Okay, we review our syllabus every semester to make sure that everything or all learning outcomes are aligned. Okay, kaya kung makikita niyo sa syllabus ng St. Louis, okay, meron na tayong program learning outcomes assigned to institutional learning, aligned to institutional learning outcomes, and these program outcomes are also aligned with the course learning outcomes and others. We do regular review of our syllabus to check the alignment of the learning outcomes, the course learning outcomes to the program outcomes, or even to the institutional learning outcomes. Because the syllabus has to be adjusted, has to be flexible depending on the kind of learners, okay, that you will be using in teaching the content of the said syllabus. Okay, Jamie?
Yes, sir. Thank you po.
We listen to Jire?
Sir, I just want to share my insights po.
Yes. Thank you.
Aside from learning outcomes being aligned, it has to be accepted as well by both teachers and students, because it is only through communicating with the students that will help in providing standards that students will presumably meet. There has to be an expectation agreed upon the teacher and the students.
Yeah, that's right. That's perfectly said, Jire. It has to be agreed upon. It has to be a collective agreement between the teacher and the students. Okay, but I am not telling that our expectations will be so low. I'm not telling that. Okay? Sabihin nyo, dapat pala mababa lang expectation ko nang sa ganun ma-meet lahat ng estudyante ko. But remember also that you have advanced learners in class. So you have to meet halfway when you agree as regards the expectations communicated through the learning outcome. outcomes. Okay, thank you, Jire. That's a wonderful, it's a beautiful sharing. That's a beautiful learning insight. Any more? So we have PJ, we have Jami and Jire sharing in class. Are there any other student in class who would like to share their insight or to ask some questions? Okay, no more. So we maybe now continue our discussion. Okay. So to summarize, our discussion as regards outcomes, learning outcomes describe what students are able to demonstrate in terms of knowledge, skills, values upon completion of a course, a span of several courses, or a program. Clear articulation of learning outcomes serves as the foundation to evaluating the effectiveness of the teaching and learning process. Now, our learning outcomes have to be smarter. We have to remember the word smarter. It's an acronym to mean S, they have to be specific. M, they have to be meaningful or and measurable. A, they have to be achievable or attainable. They have to be relevant. They have to be time-bound or timely. They have to be evaluated. And they have to be re-evaluated, or the achievement of such award will mean celebration. Okay, the achievement of such outcome will mean celebration of for the part of the student and the teacher. It has to be rewarding. Okay, the achievement of the learning outcome has to be rewarding. Okay, now what do you mean by specific? Okay, dito papasok yung paggamit ng mga simple action verbs. Okay, anyway, we will be discussing that later. Measurable, ibig sabihin, madaling makita, madaling malaman kung paano nakakamit ng estudyante yung ating bunga ng pagkatuto. Okay? Pag sinabi namang achievable, kaya nilang gawin. Pag sinabi namang relevant, they will find connection to what you ask them do, to what you expect for them. Okay? Magagamit nila yung learning outcome na ito sa araw-araw ng pamumuhay. When we say timely, sana okay na ayon sa panahon yung paggawa ng bunga ng pagkatuto, o di kaya naman ay nakapagsasabi ng current development or current progress of the learners. Okay, it has to be evaluated, meaning to say it has to produce a quality judgment as regards the learning of our students. Okay, and of course, okay, when we say to re-evaluate or reward, okay, it has to tell something. The achievement of such learning outcome should tell something about the complete whole person development of the learner. We will be discussing that as we go through with the presentation. Now, introducing the term, the acronym SMARTER will lead us to understanding the components of SMARTER student learning outcomes. Okay, please take note of this, that there are three essential components of a measurable learning outcomes. Okay, what are these three essential components? We have the first one, student learning behaviors, meaning to say what are actions expected for students to be doing. We have appropriate assessment methods. What methodology shall we use so that the student could be able to do the behavior? And of course, what criteria, specific criteria that the students should understand, that the students should be able to manifest when they are doing the behavior. Okay, for example, of a student learning outcome to demonstrate these three essential components. Example of learning outcome is this. Write write one example of a learning outcome targeting each level of the cognitive domain to demonstrate understanding. Sige, tanggalin natin to demonstrate. Write one learning outcome for each level of the cognitive domain of learning. Okay, now that's an example of a learning outcome. What is the student learning behavior? Sige, isulat ninyo muna. You write it in a piece of paper. Write one learning outcome. Write one learning outcome for each level of the cognitive learning domain. Okay? Write one learning outcome for each level of the cognitive domain. What is the student behavior? When we say student learning behavior, these are the actions that the student should be doing. Anyone?
They will write, sir.
Okay, good. They will write. Okay. Now, what is the appropriate? Who is that? Who was that?
Angela, sir.
Angela Tangan.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Angela, thank you. That's right. The student learning behavior is to write. Okay. Now, how about the appropriate assessment method? The behavior is to write sample learning outcomes. What is the assessment method? When we say assessment method, okay, these pertain to the activity that you will ask them do to demonstrate a certain behavior, to demonstrate a certain learning behavior. So based on the example, what is the appropriate assessment method in the example? Anyone? Please feel free to speak because I cannot see you while I'm presenting this lesson. Just feel free to speak, please, if you know the answer. Anyone? Assessment method pertains to the activity that the student should do to demonstrate the behavior. So write an example of write one learning outcome for each level of cognitive domain. Angela said that the student behavior is to write sample learning outcome. What then is the assessment method using that sample learning outcome? Yes, anyone? Yes, anyone please? No one? Hello? Hello? No one would like to recite?
Sir, can you repeat po?
Okay, what is, the example is this, right? One learning outcome for each level of the cognitive domain. When I ask you, what is the student learning behavior? Angela said it's writing a sample learning outcome is the behavior, and that is correct. Now, my second question is, using that example, what is the assessment method? And we said that assessment method referred to tasks that students will do to demonstrate doing the behavior.
Formative, sir.
Formative. Sino yun? Si Archie ba? Sino yun?
Yes, sir. Di ko sure.
Okay. Okay, sige. Formative ito. Formative nga siya. Pero alin dun sa statement nung sample learning outcome ang nagsasabi ng assessment method na ginamit?
Po.
What will you ask them do? So for them to write a learning outcome. If the behavior that you expect them do is to write a sample learning outcome, what will you ask them do so that they could be able to do that behavior?
Sir, written assessment.
Yes, please repeat.
Sir, written assessment.
Okay, good. Written assessment. Or the same answer to the student learning behavior. Write a sample learning outcome. And writing a sample learning outcome is an example of a written assessment. Very good. That's the assessment method being used. Who's that, please?
Vernel po.
Vernel. Thank you, Vernel. That's right. Now, we already have identified the assessment method using the example learning outcome. What is now the performance criteria? What is the performance criteria? What should they observe while doing the behavior? What should they observe while doing the task, the assessment task? Again, the learning outcome is write a learning outcome for each level of the cognitive domain.
Sir, parang yung checking ng teacher, sir.
Ano?
Checking of teacher.
Checking, sino yan? Sino nagre-recite?
EJ po, sir.
EJ, checking of teachers. Saan nagagaling yung checking of teachers? Pag sinabi natin performance criteria, EJ, ang ibig sabihin, ano dapat yung kanilang gabay para nang sa ganun ay ma-perfect nila o magawa nila ng mabuti yung pinapagawang behavior ng teacher.
Rubric, sir.
Rubric. Ay.
Ha? O, yung rubric itong tool, tama? Tama ba ako? Pero yung rubric, naglalaman niya ng success criteria o performance criteria. What specific criteria should the students observe while doing the behavior?
Sir, dapat, ay sige.
Learning outcome natin ay ito. Ang learning outcome natin ay makapagsusulat ng isang bunga ng pagkatuto sa magkapagsusulat ng halimbawa ng bunga ng pagkatuto, okay, sa bawat antas ng level sa bawat antas ng cognitive sa bawat antas ng aspetong kognitibo. Okay. Anong performance criteria?
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, it should be based on the level of the cognitive domain.
Very good. Okay, who's that?
Princess, sir.
Pulintan, tama?
Babaran po.
Babaran. Okay, good. That's it. It's the completeness of the learning outcomes vis-a-vis each level of the cognitive domain. So that's the performance criteria. Okay, sige. We get another example para maunawaan ninyo yung 3 essential components of a measurable learning outcome. Okay. We have this example. Compare and contrasts cooperation and competition using a Venn diagram. Compare and contrast cooperation and competition using a Venn diagram. Okay. Naisulat na ninyo example? Nasaan doon ang student behavior?
Sir, compare and contrast.
Compare and contrast, sir.
Compare and contrast.
Compare and
Contrast.
Okay. Ngayon, ang tanong ko ngayon. Okay. Alin doon ang assessment method?
Paggawa ng Venn diagram, sir.
Okay, good. The Venn diagram, who's that? Shekina, tama? Was it Shekina?
Yes po.
Okay, Shekina, that's right. Paggawa ng Venn diagram is the assessment method. Very good. Now, what is the criteria?
Pag napag-compare and contrast po yung cooperation and competition, sir.
Okay, very good, Micaela. Kapag na-compare and contrast na nila talaga yung cooperation and competition. Okay, very good. Last example. Okay. This is another example of a learning outcome. Okay, ito. Design. Okay. Design a 5-slide presentation. I design a 5-slide presentation to summarize, okay? To summarize the major concepts. The major concepts in sociology. Okay. Design a 5-slide presentation to summarize the major concepts in sociology. Sige, madaling unang tanong. Nasaan doon ang student learning behavior?
Design.
Okay, good. Dahil sabay-sabay kayo. Sige, hindi ko na-identify unang sumagot. Tama yun. Design, okay, design a presentation. That's the behavior. Now, the question is, what is the assessment method?
Summarize.
Summarize the major concept in sociology.
Very good. Summarizing. Okay, that's right. Summarizing. Now, what is the criteria?
Yung paggawa po ng 5-slide presentation to summarize the concepts.
Erika kanina. Erika, si Jamie. Okay? Erika, gabay kanina.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sabi ni Erika. Ano sabi mo ulit, Erika?
Sir, kapag nakapag-design na sila ng 5-slide presentation, sir.
Okay, so it has to be 5-slide presentation. The 5-slide is the criteria. Okay? Very good. Okay, naunawaan ho ba yung tatlong component?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Now, we now continue our discussion. Okay, tignan na natin yung different parts ng learning outcome. Okay. So this one, measurable learning outcome. This one naman, okay, we have to consider the following. Okay. Our learning outcomes have to focus on student behavior. And how to do that? We can only, okay, our learning outcomes should be written in the perspective of the students or the learners. So we have to put in mind that it is our students, it will be our students doing this outcome. So it's not us. Kasi if our perspective is of the teachers, then that is the educational objective or learning objective, but not the outcome. Because all outcomes have to be done or have to be achieved by the students. So it has to focus on student behavior. Kaya nga lagi nagsisimula iyan doon sa student behavior. When we write our learning outcomes, we always have to start with the student behavior. Okay, yun talagang gagawin ng estudyante. So yung kanina example natin, sabi natin, design a 5-slide presentation to summarize the major concepts in sociology. Okay. Now, una lagi si design a 5-slide presentation because that is the behavior that we would like our students do. And putting it in the first part or at the first part of the statement or the outcome statement would mean that we are putting focus, okay, to student behavior. Kaya hindi pwede na sabihin natin to summarize the major concepts, okay, to summarize the major concepts in sociology, okay, students will design a 5-slide presentation. So, balik na rin dapat natin. It has to be the student behavior first prior to the assessment method. Okay. Now, the next one is we have to use simple, specific action verbs. Because the verbs that we are using should easily be quantified already. Kung hindi easily quantified itong verb na gagamitin, kapag napakalawak yung verb na gagamitin natin, they are not good learning outcomes. Later on, we will discuss this, what are the verbs that are not supposed to be used when writing outcomes, and what are the different verbs that we can use, okay, to ensure that the outcome or that the behavior is measurable. Next, select appropriate assessment method. Dapat yung pagtatasa, okay, yung estratehiya mo, yung pamamaraan mo para tasahin, para makita ang pagkakakamit noong nasabing student behavior, ay dapat akma siya doon sa ipapagawa mo. Compare and contrast, for example, using Venn diagram. Is Venn diagram an appropriate assessment method to compare and contrast?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Why is it appropriate for comparing and contrasting?
Yes, sir.
Why is it appropriate? Why is Venn diagram appropriate for comparing and contrasting?
Sir, kasi may similarity and differences po pagdating
Very
sa Venn diagram.
Okay, who is that? Who's the lady reciting?
Malongga, sir.
Jami. Okay, good. And Archie yun na isa. That's good. Saan mo ilalagay yung similarities?
Sa gitna.
Sa gitna.
Sa gitna, sir.
The overlapping area, tama? The overlapping area, okay, of the two circles, tama?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, saan mo ilalagay yung differences?
Both sides, sir.
Both sides, sir.
Okay, very good. So meaning to say, when you ask students to compare and contrast, magandang gamitin ang Venn diagram. Pero pag sinabi mong compare and contrast these differing concepts using, for example, using a 2-column chart, do you think it is an appropriate strategy? 2-column chart na gagamitin, appropriate ba siya?
No,
Sir,
No, sir.
No,
Hindi,
sir.
okay? Kasi 2 columns lang iyon, walang paglalagyan ng similarities. Tama?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Pero pag sinabi kong differentiate, cooperation and differentiate
Yes.
cooperation and competition using a two-column chart. Okay ba?
Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So that's what
Applicable siya, sir.
yeah, that's right. That's what we mean by appropriateness of the assessment task that we ask our students do to meet the behavior we expect for them. Okay, and of course, we state desired performance criteria to guide our learners of the perfect, okay, behavior that they are supposed to achieve, that they are supposed to do. Okay, dapat klaro kung ano talaga yung gagawin nila. These are things that we have to consider to make our learning outcomes measurable. Okay, first, tingnan natin itong mga to. Focus on student behavior. Remember that learning outcomes are about what students are able to demonstrate upon completion of a course or span of courses for a program. Learning outcomes are not about what the instructors can provide, but what the students can demonstrate. So hindi maganda na sabihin mo, learning outcome ko, sir, is to teach, okay, to teach the lesson, to teach the major concepts of the lesson. Is that a learning outcome?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Why it's no? Why it's not a learning outcome?
Objective siya, sir.
O, isa-isa lang. Sino gusto mag-recite?
Go na, Andre.
O, Andre daw. Sige, Andre, Mr. Fugaban.
Sir, yung example mo is objective.
Okay, good.
And that outcome.
Kasi, objective siya kasi,
sa teacher siya, sir.
Okay, si teacher ang may role na ituro yung konsepto, hindi yung estudyante. Very good, Andre. Okay, now, look at this. Are these examples of learning outcomes? Okay, sige. Sino ang sasagot ng mga ito? Ito ba yung mga halimbawa ng learning outcomes? Anyone? O, basahin na mabuti. Itong apat ba na ito ay halimbawa ng learning outcomes? So far, mga nag-recite pa lang ay sina Adukul, Malonga, Manyo, Tangan, Turingan, Vernel, Kaligiran, Babaran, Makarugbo, Aguliana, Silva, and Fugaban. Or anyone? Those who are not yet, or those who didn't share anything yet to answer this question, are these examples of learning outcomes? Talagang normal kayo, no? Pag nagtanong ang teacher, tahimik lahat. Tama? Ha? That's a normal reaction from students. But anyone who would like to answer the question, you check each of these you check each of these examples. Are these learning outcomes? Number one is offer opportunities for students to master integrated use of information technology. Number two, the program will engage a significant number of students in a formalized language cultural studies program. Number three, students who participate in critical writing seminars will write 2 essays on critical thinking skills. And number four, students will be exposed to exceptionality in learning disabilities, including visual and perception disabilities. Hello? Do I have still my students with me?
Sir, try ko na lang po.
Sino yung nagre-recite?
Tangan, sir.
Angela, please.
Sir, these are not learning outcomes,
Okay.
but rather it's a learning objectives because these are not directed towards students, sir.
Very good. The focus is not on the students. Hence, they are not learning outcomes, but merely program objectives. Okay, that's right. Thank you, Angela. I hope that the others also got that point, that these are not learning outcomes because they are not written in the perspective of the students. Okay, so meaning to say, the next one is to use simple, specific action verbs. When writing learning outcomes, focus on student behavior and use simple action verbs to describe what students are expected to demonstrate. The wording should be something as follows. This will be our prompt before we write our learning outcome. Students or learners will be able to, then we just have to continue it first by identifying the exact or the specific action verb. Okay, katulad sabi natin kanina, students will be able to write sample learning outcome for each level of cognitive domain. Students will be able to design a 5-slide presentation to summarize the major concepts in sociology. Students will be able to compare and contrast cooperation and competition using a Venn diagram. So these are examples of learning outcome with specific action verbs. Now, the following are examples of learning outcomes. Students will be able to apply principles of evidence-based medicine to determine clinical diagnosis and formulate and implement acceptable treatment modalities. Students will be able to articulate cultural and socioeconomic differences and significance of these differences for instructional planning. Students will be able to use technology effectively in the delivery of instruction, assessment, professional development, and students will be able to evaluate the need for assistance technology for their studies. So these are examples of learning outcomes in higher education. This is in higher education. Anyway, later on in the succeeding discussion, we will be looking into more examples of learning outcomes. Now, please take note that since we made mention of the action verbs, that the specific action verbs that have to be used when we craft our learning outcomes, this would mean that the Bloom's taxonomy can be a useful resource in developing learning outcomes because the Bloom's taxonomy of objectives, the taxonomy of outcomes, will provide us the verbs that we need when we write learning outcomes. Okay, action verbs result in overt behavior that can be observed and measured. Please take note of this. Verbs that are unclear and verbs that relate to unobservable or unmeasurable behaviors should be avoided. I think we made mention of this in our previous discussion, in our previous presentation, that the verbs appreciate, understand, know, learn, become aware of, become familiar with, are not supposed to be used when writing learning outcomes because these are too broad for them to be measured and too broad for them to be observed. So what do you mean by appreciate? When you say appreciate the value of taking care the environment. Taking care of the environment. If you make use of appreciate, then a question will of course be asked of you. How? How will I be able to check whether my students are appreciating taking care of the environment? For example, understand, cooperation. But understanding is a very broad concept. There are different components of understanding. How can I know? How will I know that they do have to understand the lesson? Know is also too broad. Learn is also too broad. Too broad. Become aware of is also too broad. So please never use these kind of verbs when you write your learning outcomes. So ito, these are the cognitive level of Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. Okay. Now, ano pa lang po ito ha? Cognitive level pa lang ito. Meron pa tayong psychomotor level, and of course, we also have the affective domain of learning with different levels. Take note that the cognitive domain of learning involves mental operations or thinking skills. These are 6 major categories in the cognitive domain of Bloom's taxonomy that was in 1956. But in the 21st century teaching and learning, these levels of cognition, okay, have been revised. Okay, it has been revised because it has been observed that the original Bloom's taxonomy, okay, made use of a noun instead of a verb, okay, in describing the different levels. And because the 21st century, okay, the 21st century is about outcomes-based education, and outcomes-based education is about targeting actions, behaviors that the students should be able to exemplify. And actions, when we say actions and behaviors, we mean verbs, hence converting these noun-based names of the different levels of cognition to verb-based names of cognitive levels. Hence, knowledge, okay, has been changed to remembering, comprehension to understanding, application to transferring, analysis to relating, synthesis to creating, and evaluation to judging. Okay? So we proceed to the knowledge level. Please take note that there are 6, no? K, ka, ase, ang original na tawag dito. K, si, ka, se. Okay. Take note that these 6 levels are categorized into 2. The first 3 pertains to the lower order thinking skills, and the last 3, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, pertain to the higher order thinking skills. Though in the revised Bloom's taxonomy, the highest form, the highest level of cognition is no longer evaluation, but it's synthesis or creating. Because we said that in the 21st century teaching and learning, learning has to be creating. Learning has to allow our learners transfer their understanding into new contexts. They have to be able to contribute new knowledge. And contributing new knowledge would mean that students should be able to create something new out from what they have understood from their classes or from their teachers. So in the revised Bloom's taxonomy, the highest level already is the creating or synthesis in the 1956 version of the Bloom's taxonomy. Okay? Now, under knowledge, when we say knowledge, it's about remembering, recalling terms, facts, and details without necessarily understanding the concept. It's about memorizing. It's about rote memory, R-O-T-E. Okay? Rote memory or rote memory. Okay, that's knowledge. Hence, these are the knowledge level, remembering level is the lowest level of the cognitive of the levels of cognition as proposed by Bloom's and as revised as revised for the 21st century teaching and learning. Okay, so what are the different verbs under knowledge or under remembering? We have count, define, draw, identify, label, list, locate, name, outline, point, code, record, repeat, select, state, write. When you will ask students, what is the definition of photosynthesis? And students would provide a memorized definition as cited by the book, then that is an example of knowledge level. When you ask students, can you recite the multiplication table of 9? Then that is purely memorization. When did martial law take place? That is memorization. Where did the Battle of Thermopylae or Battle of Thermopylae take place or happen? Where did it happen? That is memorization. Who was the father of Indian democracy? Okay, then that is memorization. Okay, How many E's are there in the word flower? That is memorization. Okay, that is recalling, that is remembering. Okay, count 1 to 10. Define, count 1 to 10, define photosynthesis. Draw an animal. Identify the different parts of a flower. Label label the different parts of the digestive system. List, okay, list different parts of the skeletal system. Locate Philippines in the map. Name the different cities in Southeast Asia. Outline the African map. Point Greenland, okay? Point Greenland in the globe. Quote, okay? Quote an inspiring message from Dr. Jose Rizal. Recite the multiplication table of 10. Okay? Record a conversation with a seatmate. Repeat the important, repeat the major ideas presented by the teacher. Okay, so these are examples of action verbs or simple action verbs under remembering. Okay, so tomorrow we will continue our discussion on this. We hope that we could be able to finish up to the domains of learning so that I'll already post your weekly task by next week. Okay, so it's 5:52 p.m. Any question? Yeah. Okay, sige. I think EJ has something to ask. EJ? Yes, EJ.
Sir.
Mhm.
Sir, di ba po is kapag sa learning outcome po sir is more on sa students sir tapos sa learning objective po sir is more on teachers sir. Sir, in making lesson plan sir, which is the most appropriate to use sir?
Yeah, as we have said, because we already have shifted to outcomes-based education, then learning outcomes have to be used in all our learning plans. Because our learning plans are written in the perspective of the students, and because outcomes have to be done or have to be achieved by our students. Okay, so nakadepende yan doon sa klase ng curriculum na fina-follow ng Department of Education, okay, which controls the quality learning that we have in the country. Okay? Now, with the remaining time, we still have 6 minutes left. For those who failed to recite or to ask clarificatory questions, I'm giving you time to make use of the chat box, okay, for you to write your learning takeaway. Okay? O, kinukumusta kayo ng ating academic din?
Sir?
Yes, Archie?
Sir, with regards to our activity that is posted in the LMS, sir, are we going to pass on 9, sir? Or 9 ba yun, sir?
Hindi, I already have adjusted.
Move na.
Move na. Sige, sir. Thank you, sir.
Kasi nahiya ako sa'yo move ko.
Ala, hindi naman, sir. Grabe pa tayo.
Because I cannot give it this week because we didn't discuss yet the concepts. Of course, you do not know. It would be difficult for you to complete it without me discussing first the different concepts that you will need in completing the task. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's already 6. And again, thank you for making yourself available, okay, in today's video conference. I hope that you keep attending in our conferences because it would help, okay, it would help for you to understand better all the concepts presented in our course. Okay, then, so may we have our closing prayer, and may I request Archie to lead us the closing prayer. Archie, please put on your camera.
Ala, Sir Herbert talaga.
Sige.
Wait lang ba, sir? Kami nagla-learn. Okay, in the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, thank you for this wonderful afternoon with Sir Herbert. Thank you for the knowledge, the understanding, and for the lessons that have done by Sir Herbert Corpus. We ask you to bless these students and also Sir Herbert that they may continue their passion in teaching. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Goodbye, everyone, and have a nice night.
Good night. Good
Hi,
night.
sir.
Hi, sir.
Bye.
Sir, nag-good night na si Jam sa'yo, sir.
Sir,
Bye, sir.
Thank you.
Good night na din.
Goodbye, sir.
Bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye, Adi.